Midnight in the Pacific. The stars don't fade, they vanish. A sun that shouldn't exist screams into life on the horizon, turning the deep indigo of the night into a pulsing blood-orange bruise. This is the moment humanity punched a hole in the heavens just to see if the sky would bleed. On July 9th, 1962, the residents of Hawaii and New Zealand watched in a state of paralyzed awe as the atmosphere transformed into a neon graveyard. This wasn't a natural disaster, and it certainly wasn't a miracle. It was Starfish Prime, a 1.4 megaton thermonuclear warhead detonated 250 miles above the Earth. It was the night we set the sky on fire, and for a few terrifying minutes, we weren't sure if it would ever stop burning. The countdown didn't happen in a vacuum. It began on Johnston Atoll, a jagged, lonely speck of coral lost in the vastness of the ocean. There, a Thor missile sat on the launch pad, shivering under the weight of a payload more powerful than the minds that conceived it. The air was thick, a suffocating tropical humidity that mirrored the tension in the bunkers. These men, the architects of the atomic age, were no longer content with scarring the Earth or poisoning the seas. They wanted the ultimate high ground. They wanted to see if the vacuum of space could be weaponized, or if the Earth's own magnetic field could be bent to the will of a superpower. There were whispers in the dark before the button was pressed. Some of the world's most brilliant physicists had theorized about the Van Allen belts, the invisible protective bands of radiation that shield our planet from the sun's lethal breath. There were quiet, frantic debates about whether a blast of this magnitude would destabilize those belts forever. Some even feared the atmosphere itself might catch fire, a chain reaction that would strip the oxygen from the lungs of every living thing. They moved forward anyway. In the height of the Cold War, the fear of being second was far greater than the fear of ending the world. At precisely 11 o'clock p.m., the silence of the Pacific was shattered. The missile tore through the clouds, a needle piercing the skin of the world. It climbed higher than any bird, higher than any storm, entering the cold, silent void where the air ends and the cosmos begins. When the warhead reached its target altitude, it didn't just explode, it blossomed. To those watching from the beaches of Waikiki, 900 miles away, the flash was blinding. A clinical magnesium-white glare that instantly turned the night into a distorted midday. But the white light was only the beginning. It quickly dissolved into a haunting electric green and a deep, pulsing purple. The northern lights had been dragged, screaming, to the equator. But while the crowds on the beaches marveled at the artificial aurora, the world beneath them was starting to glitch. The beauty of the sky was a mask for a silent, invisible predator. In Honolulu, the lights didn't just flicker, they died in waves. Hundreds of burglar alarms began to shriek in unison, triggered by a force no human hand had touched. Telephone lines went cold. Radio stations, once filled with the rhythmic sounds of the 60s, were replaced by a wall of jagged static. An electromagnetic pulse, or EMP, had cascaded through the atmosphere, surging through the power grids of the islands with a ferocity the engineers had failed to predict. It was a phantom strike, a reminder that when you strike the heavens, the earth feels the blow. The pulse didn't stop at the ground. In the low orbit of the Earth, the consequences were even more chilling. At the time, humanity was just beginning to plant its electronic eyes in the stars. These early satellites were fragile, sophisticated pioneers of a new era. They were never meant to survive a man-made cosmic storm. Within days of the blast, several of these satellites began to go dark, their circuits fried by a surge of radiation they couldn't escape. Starfish Prime had created something the scientists hadn't fully accounted for, an artificial radiation belt. This ghost belt was far more intense and persistent than anything nature had provided. It lingered for years, an invisible lethal barrier that turned the space around our planet into a graveyard for technology. Behind the closed doors of the monitoring stations, the mood shifted from triumph to a growing sense of dread. The instruments weren't just recording a blast, they were recording a global disturbance that refused to dissipate. The artificial aurora was reported as far away as New Zealand, a shimmering neon scar that served as a constant reminder of the fragility of our environment. The scientists had sought to understand how nuclear debris would interact with the Earth's magnetic field, but in doing so, they had essentially played with the fuses of our planet's life support system. The magnetic field is our only defense against the searing radiation of the sun, and for a moment we had bruised it. The arrogance of the mission remains one of the most unsettling chapters of the atomic age. There is a profound contradiction in a species that seeks to protect itself by threatening the very air it breathes. The official reports would later focus on the data gained, the insights into plasma physics and high-altitude radiation, but the unofficial narrative is one of a narrow escape. We didn't know if the hole we punched in the magnetosphere would heal. We didn't know if the radiation would rain down and alter the chemistry of our soil or our oceans. We were gambling with stakes that were planetary in scale, driven by a desperate need to claim a battlefield that didn't belong to us. As the years stretched into decades, the data from Starfish Prime became the foundation for modern atmospheric physics, yet the haunting imagery of the night the sun rose persists in the shadows of history. It serves as a testament to an era where the pursuit of power often outpaced the understanding of the medium being manipulated. We learned that we could turn the sky into a weapon, but we also learned that such weapons are indifferent. They do not distinguish between friend and foe, or between the target and the observer. The pulse that knocked out the streetlights in Hawaii was a small, localized taste of a much larger, global catastrophe. If a similar event were to occur today, the silence wouldn't just be local, it would be absolute. In a world entirely dependent on a digital architecture of satellites, interconnected grids, and global communications, an EMP of that scale would do more than flicker the lights. It would reset the clock of civilization. The screens would go black, the GPS would fail, and the delicate web that holds our modern lives together would unravel in seconds. Starfish Prime was a glimpse into a reality where humanity's reach exceeds its grasp, leaving us to wonder what other invisible forces we are currently tampering with in our search for dominance. Even now, researchers look back at the archives and wonder if we truly understood the ripples we sent through the cosmos. The artificial radiation belts eventually dissipated, or so we are told, but the psychological scar remains. It is the realization that the sky above us is not an infinite, untouchable void. It is a delicate layer of protection, a veil that can be torn. We are living under a ceiling that we once tried to set on fire, and the shadows of those flames still linger in the files of a cold, calculated past. The mystery of that night isn't just about the science. It's about the silence that followed the flash. For those few minutes over the Pacific, the world was forced to confront its own vulnerability. The birds in Hawaii were reportedly confused, some taking flight as if it were dawn, only to find the world plunged back into darkness minutes later. It was a disruption of the very rhythm of life, a temporary suspension of the laws of nature by the hands of men in white coats and military uniforms. The glowing curtains of light that stretched across the ocean were described by some as beautiful, but that beauty was born from a violent intrusion. It was a neon scar across the night, a visual representation of energy that had nowhere to go but down. Was the experiment worth the risk? Those who measure success in megatons and milliseconds would say yes. They would point to the defensive capabilities developed and the scientific mysteries solved. But for the rest of the world, it remains a chilling chapter in the story of our species. It highlights a time when we were willing to gamble with the integrity of the atmosphere itself. We looked into the abyss of space and decided to throw a torch into it, just to see what the light would reveal. What we found was a mirror reflecting our own capacity for recklessness. The ghost of that explosion still haunts the upper reaches of our world. Every time a satellite malfunctions or a mysterious pulse is detected in the ionosphere, the data from 1962 is revisited. It remains a foundational mystery of the atomic age, a moment when the boundaries between science and madness became dangerously blurred. The Pacific is quiet today, and the night sky over Hawaii remains dark and filled with natural stars. But the memory of Starfish Prime serves as a reminder that we are capable of making the sun rise at midnight. As we look toward the future, toward new technologies and new frontiers in space, the lessons of that July night remain relevant. We must ask ourselves if we are still seeking to dominate the forces of nature without fully respecting their complexity. The sky is no longer on fire, but the embers of that ambition still burn in the secret laboratories and testing grounds of the world. We are still the people who tried to burn the sky, and that is a truth that no amount of time can truly extinguish. The shadows of Starfish Prime are long and cold, reminding us that for every action, there is a reaction we may not be prepared to handle. The silence of the Pacific that followed the blast was a heavy, suffocating thing, a silence that asked a question we are still trying to answer. How much of our world are we willing to sacrifice for the sake of a temporary advantage? The answer may still be drifting in the high-altitude winds, a lingering residue of a night when the stars went out and a man-made monster took their place. In the end, we saw that the sky is not a roof, but a veil. And on that night in 1962, we realized just how easy it is to tear that veil apart. The mystery isn't in what we did, but in why we thought we had the right to do it. The artificial dawn of Starfish Prime remains a dark thriller written in the history of our atmosphere, a story of power, hubris, and a sky that refused to stay dark.